This will be mini-series of employee stories who worked at gas station at Route 66. I will tell them until workers run out of stories or until they mysteriously disappear. Enjoy. I never thought a job pumping gas would be the thing that broke me. But looking back, that stretch of Route 66 was always waiting to swallow someone whole. It was one of those forgotten stations, the kind with flickering neon signs and pumps that groaned like old bones when the wind picked up. I took the night shift because the pay was better, and honestly I needed the quiet after my days blurred into nothing but regrets. The owner, a grizzled guy who smelled like motor oil and regret, warned me once, "After 10, folks ain't right. Keep the door locked if you have to." I laughed it off then, figuring it was just small-town superstition. But that first night, I learned he wasn't joking. It started slow, the way nightmares do. The sun dipped low, painting the desert in blood-red streaks, and by 9, the last of the normal customers had trickled through. Truckers grabbing coffee, families on road trips filling up before pushing on. I wiped down the counters, restocked the cigarettes behind the register, and flipped the sign to open even though the isolation made it feel like a lie. The station sat alone, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but endless blacktop and scrub brush whispering secrets to the stars. No radio signal worth a damn, just static that sometimes sounded like voices if you listened too hard. The clock hit 10, and the world outside shifted. The air grew thicker, like someone had draped a wet blanket over everything. I was alone in the fluorescent-lit bubble of the store, surrounded by shelves of candy bars and motor oil, the hum of the fridge the only company. Then the first customer pulled up. No headlights, just the crunch of tires on gravel that made my skin prickle. I peered out the window, expecting a late-night traveler, but the car was an old sedan, rusted through like it had been dragged from a junkyard grave. The driver didn't get out right away. He just sat there, silhouette unmoving, staring at the pumps as if deciding whether to bother. When he finally stepped out, my stomach twisted. He was tall, too tall, his limbs stretching like they were made of rubber. His skin hung loose, pale and mottled, like it had been soaked in water for days. He shuffled toward the door, his shoes scraping the concrete in a rhythm that didn't match human steps. Drag, pause, slap, drag. The bell jingled as he pushed in, and the smell hit me first. Rot, sweet and cloying like roadkill left to bake under the sun. His eyes were the worst, milky white, no pupils, just endless fog staring right through me. "Evening?" I muttered, forcing a smile, my hand inching toward the baseball bat under the counter. He didn't respond, just wandered the aisles, fingers trailing over the chips and sodas, leaving smudges that looked like oil but smelled like decay. He picked up a candy bar, unwrapped it slowly, and bit into it wrapper and all, crunching through the plastic with teeth that gleamed too sharp in the light. Chocolate smeared his lips, mixing with something darker, thicker, dribbling down his chin. I watched, frozen, as he chewed, his jaw unhinging slightly with each bite like a snake swallowing prey. He finally approached the counter, dropping a crumpled bill that felt damp and warm to the touch. "Gas," he rasped, voice like gravel grinding in his throat. I nodded, rung him up, and he left without another word. But as he pumped the fuel, I swear I saw him tilt his head back, mouth open wide, and pour a stream of gasoline straight down his gullet, gulping it like water. The pump clicked off, and he drove away into the night, no taillights, just vanishing into the dark. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe some drifter high on something. But the unease lingered, a cold knot in my gut. I locked the door after that, policy be damned, and busied myself with mopping the floor where he'd left footprints. Sticky, black residue that wouldn't come clean no matter how hard I scrubbed. It smeared into shapes that almost looked like faces, screaming ones, but I shook it off as my imagination running wild. Around midnight, the next one came. This time it was a woman, or what used to be one. Her van rolled in silently, no engine noise, just coasting to a stop by the air pump. She got out, dressed in a floral sundress that hung off her frame like it was meant for someone twice her size. Her hair was matted, clumped with dirt and what looked like dried blood. She smiled as she entered, teeth stained yellow, gaps where some were missing, and her lips cracked open wider than they should, splitting at the corners. "Got any maps?" she asked, her voice high and childlike, but her eyes darted around like a cornered animal. I pointed to the rack by the door, and she snatched one up, unfolding it with trembling hands. As she studied it, I noticed the scars, long, jagged lines crisscrossing her arms, fresh and oozing, like she'd been clawed by something big. She traced a route with her finger, muttering to herself, "Not far now, not far," over and over. She bought a pack of gum and a soda, paying with coins that were warm, almost hot, as if fresh from a fire. When she popped a piece of gum in her mouth, she chewed vigorously. But then her jaw locked, and she kept going, grinding until blood seeped from her gums, mixing with the pink bubbles she blew. One bubble burst, splattering red flecks on the counter. "Sorry," she giggled, but it wasn't funny. It was the sound of something breaking inside. Outside, as she filled her tank, I watched her lean against the van, scratching at her arms until skin peeled away in strips, revealing raw muscle underneath. She didn't flinch, just kept scratching, whispering, "They're under there, always crawling." Flakes of flesh fluttered to the ground like confetti, and when she drove off, a trail of blood spots marked her path into the darkness. By then, sweat soaked my shirt and my hands shook as I dialed the owner. No answer, just voicemail. I considered calling the cops, but what would I say? Weird people at the gas station? They'd laugh me off. So I stayed, because quitting on the first night felt like admitting defeat, and the bills wouldn't pay themselves. The hours dragged, the clock mocking me with its slow ticks. At 2, a group pulled up, 3 of them in a pickup truck that rattled like it was held together by spite. They piled out, laughing in a way that echoed wrong, too loud for the empty night. The leader was a burly man with a beard matted in grime, his companions skinnier, almost skeletal, their clothes hanging like shrouds. They burst in, grabbing beers and snacks, their hands leaving greasy prints everywhere. One of them, the smallest, had eyes that didn't blink, just stared fixedly at the lottery tickets. "Gimme a winner," he snarled, slamming cash down. As I scratched off the ticket, he leaned in close, breath reeking of sulfur and decay, whispering, "I can smell your fear. Tastes like honey." They paid and left, but not before the burly one turned at the door, grinning with teeth filed to points. "See you soon," he said, and they piled back into the truck. As they peeled out, I heard screams from the bed, human screams, muffled but desperate, like someone trapped under a tarp. The truck vanished, but the echoes lingered, bouncing off the desert until they faded into whimpers. I barricaded myself in the bathroom after that, splashing water on my face, trying to convince the mirror that I was just tired, hallucinating from the isolation. But the reflection showed bags under my eyes and a pallor that wasn't there before. When I came out, the store felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The worst came at 3, when the lights flickered. A figure approached on foot. No vehicle, just emerging from the shadows like he'd been born there. He was average build, average height, but his face, God. His face was a mask of wounds, fresh cuts crisscrossing in patterns that looked deliberate, like runes carved into flesh. Blood trickled steadily, soaking his shirt collar. He didn't buy anything, just stood by the window, pressing his palms against the glass, leaving bloody handprints that smeared as he slid them down. His mouth moved silently, lips forming words I couldn't hear, but his eyes locked on mine, pleading or threatening. I couldn't tell. Then he smiled and his tongue lolled out, split down the middle, forked like a snake's, wriggling as if tasting the air. I yelled for him to leave, bat in hand, but he just kept staring, unblinking, until suddenly he convulsed, body jerking like a puppet on strings. His skin rippled, bulges forming under the surface, as if things were moving inside him, pushing against the flesh. One bulge on his arm burst open, spraying blood across the window in an arc, and something small and wriggling fell out. A worm, thick as a finger, squirming on the concrete before burrowing into the cracks. He laughed then, a wet gurgling sound, and backed away, melting into the night. I spent the next hour scrubbing the glass, but the stains wouldn't fade, just smeared into ghostly shapes that watched me. Dawn crept in slow, the sky lightening to gray, and the normal world returned with it. A few early drivers stopped by, oblivious, chatting about the weather. I finished my shift numb, driving home with the radio blasting to drown out the memories. But that night haunted me, the customers' faces etched in my mind, their abnormalities replaying like a bad dream. I told myself it was a one-off, some freak coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. Route 66 after dark wasn't for the living, and the next shift it was waiting. The second night at the Route 66 gas station, I almost didn't go back. My hands shook the whole drive, the memory of those customers clawing at my nerves, the blood on the glass, the worm wriggling into the concrete, the screams from that truck. They weren't things you shake off with coffee and daylight. But rent was due, and pride's a stubborn thing. I told myself I'd imagined the worst of it, that the desert plays tricks on a tired mind. By the time I pulled into the lot, the neon sign buzzing like a dying insect, I almost believed it. The air was heavy again, the kind of thick that clings to your lungs. I locked the door behind me, checked the bat under the counter, and kept the lights as bright as they'd go, though the fluorescents flickered like they were mocking my nerves. The first hour was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional moth battering the window. I busied myself restocking the energy drinks, avoiding the spot where those bloody handprints still stained the glass, faint but stubborn, like the station itself was holding onto the memory. At 10, the shift began again. The gravel crunched outside, slow and deliberate, like someone was pacing just beyond the light. I squinted through the window, expecting another rusted car, but there was nothing, just the sound, circling the station. Crunch, pause, crunch. My pulse hammered in my throat, but I stayed at the counter, gripping the bat until my knuckles ached. Then a shadow flicked across the edge of the lot, too quick to track, and the crunching stopped. Silence pressed in, heavier than before, and I swear the air smelled faintly of copper. The bell jingled and my heart lurched. She was small, maybe 5 feet, wrapped in a tattered coat that dragged on the floor. Her hair hung in greasy strands covering most of her face, but what I could see was wrong. Skin too tight, like it was stretched over a skull that didn't fit. She shuffled to the candy aisle, her movements jerky, like a marionette with half its strings cut. When she reached for a chocolate bar, her sleeve slipped, revealing an arm covered in sores, each one weeping a thick yellow pus that glistened under the lights. The smell hit me, sour, like milk gone bad, mixed with something metallic. "Need help?" I croaked, voice betraying me. She turned, and I wished she hadn't. Her eyes were sunken, almost lost in the sockets, but they burned with a feverish intensity, darting over me like she was sizing up prey. Her lips parted, revealing teeth ground down to nubs, and when she spoke, her voice was a wet hiss. "Just looking," she said, but her tongue flicked out, long and gray, licking at the sores on her hand like she was tasting them. She grabbed a handful of candy bars, wrappers crinkling as she stuffed them into her coat. I rang her up, keeping my distance, but she leaned in close, her breath hot and rancid. "You see them too, don't you?" she whispered, her tongue brushing her lips, leaving a smear of that yellow ooze. "They come at night, always hungry." Before I could answer, she dropped coins on the counter, old tarnished things that looked like they'd been dug up from somewhere deep, and shuffled out. Outside, she didn't go to a car. She just stood by the pumps, unwrapping a candy bar and shoving it into her mouth, wrapper and all. Her jaw worked furiously, crunching through plastic and chocolate, and I saw her throat bulge as she swallowed, like something alive was sliding down. Then she crouched, low and animal-like, and scuttled into the dark, her coat flapping like wings. I locked the door again, my hands trembling so bad I fumbled the key. Midnight brought the next one. A man this time, heavy-set, wearing a flannel shirt soaked through with sweat, or something worse. His face was puffy, almost doughy, with veins pulsing visibly under the skin, like worms trapped beneath. He didn't speak, just pointed at the cigarettes behind me. I grabbed a pack, but when I turned back, he was closer, leaning over the counter, his breath shallow and rattling. His fingers, thick and swollen, tapped the counter, leaving wet streaks that smelled like rotting meat. Up close I saw his neck, gills or something like them, slits opening and closing with each breath, oozing a clear fluid that dripped onto his collar. He paid with a crumpled bill, damp and stained brown, and as I handed him the cigarettes, his hand brushed mine. It was cold, clammy, and for a second I felt something move under his skin, like a finger twitching inside his palm. He grinned, lips peeling back to show gums that bled freely, staining his teeth red. "Nice night," he wheezed, and when he walked out, he left a trail of that fluid slick and shimmering on the floor. I watched him climb into a truck that looked too small for him, the chassis groaning as he squeezed in. As he drove off, the tailgate rattled open, and I glimpsed something in the back, pale shapes writhing, tangled together like a nest of snakes, but bigger, human-sized. I mopped the floor again, gagging at the smell, the fluid soaking into the tiles like they were drinking it. The bat stayed in my hand now, a useless comfort. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see those gilled slits or that scuttling woman staring back. The station felt alive, the walls creaking, the lights buzzing louder, like it was waiting for the next one. At 2, the air turned colder, sharp enough to sting my skin. The pumps shut off on their own, screens blinking error codes I'd never seen. Then the lights dimmed and a low hum started, not from the fridge but from the ground itself, vibrating up through my boots. I stepped outside, bat raised, thinking maybe a fuse had blown. But the desert was wrong. The stars were gone, swallowed by a blackness that felt solid, like it could reach out and grab you. And then I saw him. He wasn't walking, not really. He glided, feet barely touching the ground, a lanky figure in a suit that hung off him like it was made for someone else. His face was hidden by a wide-brimmed hat until he tilted it up, revealing a mouth that stretched ear to ear, no lips, just a gash of teeth that clicked together like a trap. His eyes were black, not empty but filled with something that reflected the light wrong, like oil slicks. He stopped at the edge of the lot, just outside the glow of the pumps, and raised a hand. His fingers were too long, bending backward at the joints, and they wiggled like they were beckoning me. I backed inside, slamming the door, but he didn't move closer. He just stood there, swaying, his mouth opening wider, and I heard it, a sound like static but with words buried in it, repeating my name over and over, low and insistent. I turned off the interior lights, hoping he'd leave, but the humming grew louder, and the glass rattled in its frame. When I peeked out, he was gone, but the pumps were on again, spewing gasoline onto the ground, pooling in a way that looked like it was forming shapes, hands, faces, reaching up. I didn't go outside to shut them off. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move, and my chest felt like it was caving in. I sat behind the counter, bat across my lap, listening to the pumps gurgle and the hum pulse through the walls. By 3, the air was so thick I could barely breathe, and the smell of gasoline mixed with something sweeter, like decay and sugar syrup. The bell jingled again, and my heart stopped. This one was a kid, or looked like one, barefoot in pajamas torn at the knees, her hair tangled with burrs. She clutched a stuffed bear, its fur matted and one eye missing. She didn't look at me, just wandered the aisles, humming a tune that sounded like a lullaby but wrong, the notes twisting into something sharp and grating. When she got closer, I saw her hands, fingers fused together like melted wax, and her nails were long, curling inward, piercing her own skin. Blood dripped onto the floor, little patters that echoed too loud. She stopped at the counter, holding out the bear. "He's thirsty," she said, her voice small but clear like it was coming from somewhere else. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, and she smiled, revealing a mouth full of needle-like teeth, packed so tight they overlapped. She reached into the bear, tearing open its stomach, and pulled out a handful of wet red string, guts or something like them, pulsing faintly. She dropped it on the counter, still smiling. "For you," she said, and ran out, her bare feet slapping the concrete, leaving bloody prints. I didn't touch the mess. I couldn't. I shoved it into a trash bag with the bat, gagging at the squelch, and locked myself in the bathroom until dawn. The hum faded, the pump stopped, and when the first morning customer came, a trucker complaining about the price of diesel, I almost hugged him. But the bag was still there, leaking through the plastic, and the bloody prints hadn't faded. I drove home shaking, knowing I'd be back tomorrow because I had no choice. The station wasn't done with me. I didn't sleep after that second shift. How could I? The image of that kid's needle-teeth grin, the wet red string spilling from her bear, burned into my brain like a brand. I spent the day staring at the ceiling, the hum from the gas station still vibrating in my bones, like it had burrowed into me. My apartment smelled faintly of gasoline and rot, no matter how many windows I opened. I called in sick, but the owner's voicemail was full, and the thought of leaving that job unanswered felt like abandoning a sinking ship with no one else to drown. So by dusk, I was back in my car, driving down Route 66, the desert swallowing the last of the light. The station looked smaller tonight, crouched under the weight of the dark. The neon sign flickered erratically, spitting sparks that died on the gravel. I locked the door behind me, checked the bat, still sticky from last night's mess, and turned on every light, though they buzzed like a swarm of flies. The bloody footprints from the kid were still there, faint but unmistakable, curling toward the back wall like they were pointing to something. I avoided looking at them, focusing instead on wiping down the already clean counter. Anything to keep my hands busy. 10 o'clock hit, and the air thickened again, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. The first customer didn't drive up. They just appeared. 1 second, the lot was empty. The next, a figure stood by the pumps, motionless like they'd been there all along. He was short, hunched, wearing a hoodie that hid his face in shadow. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, but they bulged, twitching, like something inside was trying to claw out. The bell jingled as he pushed in, and the smell hit me. Burnt hair and something sour, like bile. He didn't browse, just shuffled to the counter, his head tilted so I couldn't see his eyes. "Coffee," he muttered, voice low and cracked, like he hadn't spoken in years. I poured a cup from the pot, hands shaking, and slid it across. When he reached for it, his sleeve pulled back, revealing a hand that wasn't a hand. Fingers fused into a claw, skin gray and cracked like dried mud, with tiny hair-like spines poking through. He gripped the cup, and the plastic lid melted where he touched it, bubbling and hissing. He didn't seem to notice, just raised the cup to his hood, where a slit opened. Too wide, too wet, slurping the coffee down in one gulp, steam rising from where his mouth should have been. He dropped a coin on the counter, old and etched with symbols I didn't recognize, and left without another word. Outside, he didn't touch the pumps, just stood there swaying, then walked into the dark, his shadow stretching longer than it should, like it was peeling away from him. I mopped where he'd stood, the floor scorched black in a perfect circle, the smell of burnt rubber lingering. Midnight brought worse. A car pulled up, an old station wagon with windows so dark they looked painted over. The driver didn't get out, but the passenger did. A woman, tall and thin, her dress clinging to her like it was wet. Her hair was long, trailing past her waist, and it moved not with the wind but like it was underwater, swaying in slow, unnatural curls. She glided to the door, her feet bare and leaving wet prints that smelled like salt water and decay. When she entered, her eyes locked on mine, pale, almost translucent, with something dark swimming behind them, like minnows in a murky pond. "Got any water?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly, like it was coming from deep inside her. I pointed to the fridge, but she shook her head. "Not that kind." She leaned over the counter, and I saw her neck, slits like gills pulsing, leaking a thin trickle of black fluid that stained her dress. She reached for me, her fingers webbed and slick, and I stumbled back, knocking over a display of chips. "You're warm," she whispered, licking her lips with a tongue that was too long, forked at the tip. "So warm." I grabbed the bat, holding it between us, but she just laughed, a sound like drowning, wet and choking. She grabbed a bottle of soda, twisted the cap off with a flick of her wrist and poured it over her head, letting it run down her face, mixing with the black ooze. Her skin absorbed it, the liquid disappearing into her pores, and she sighed, a shudder running through her. "Better," she said, tossing me a damp dollar bill that felt like it had been pulled from a swamp. She left, gliding back to the wagon, and as it drove off, I saw shapes in the windows, hands pressing against the glass, smearing it with that same black fluid. I was shaking so bad I could barely hold the mop, but I cleaned her prints, the floor hissing faintly where the fluid had pooled. The station felt alive now, the walls creaking, the lights flickering in patterns that seemed deliberate, Like Morse code I couldn't read. I kept the bat in my hand, pacing, checking the windows every few minutes. The desert outside was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. At 2, the ground hummed again, stronger this time, rattling the shelves. Cans clattered to the floor, rolling in circles like they were drawn to something. I stepped outside, bat raised, the air so cold it burned my lungs. The pumps were on, spewing gasoline again, the liquid pooling in shapes that looked like eyes blinking up at me. Then I saw it. Something moving at the edge of the lot, low and fast, like a dog but wrong. It darted between the pumps, too quick to track, but I caught glimpses. Matted fur, too many legs. A face that was all mouth, teeth glinting in the neon glow. It stopped suddenly, crouched by the furthest pump and turned toward me. Its eyes were human, bloodshot and wide, but its mouth stretched across its face, opening to reveal rows of teeth that spiraled inward like a lamprey's maw. It hissed, a sound that crawled up my spine and scuttled toward the station. I ran inside, slamming the door, but it hit the glass hard, the impact shaking the frame. The glass held, but the thing pressed its face against it, its tongue, long and barbed, licking the surface, leaving streaks of saliva that smoked faintly. I hid behind the counter, heart pounding as it circled the building, its claws scratching the walls, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. It didn't try to get in again, just kept circling, hissing my name in that same static-laced voice from last night. I don't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, but when it stopped, the silence was worse. I peeked out and saw nothing, just claw marks gouged into the concrete, deep and jagged, filled with that same black fluid. By 3, I was a wreck, sitting on the floor, bat across my knees, staring at the door. That's when the final one came. No car, no sound, just a shadow that grew outside the window, tall and thin, like a tree stripped of leaves. The bell didn't ring when the door opened. I'd locked it, I know I had. But he was inside anyway, standing by the counter. His face was blank, not featureless but smooth, like skin stretched over clay, no eyes, no mouth, just a faint indent where they should have been. He wore a suit, pristine but old, like something from a funeral parlor's attic. He didn't speak, just pointed at the register. My hands moved on their own, ringing up nothing, and he slid a coin across the counter, cold, heavy, etched with a symbol that hurt to look at, like it was twisting in my vision. He leaned closer and I heard it. A whisper, not from his face but from inside my head, low and buzzing, saying, "You're part of it now." His head tilted, and the skin split. A crack forming where a mouth would be, oozing something thick and gray that smelled like ash and bone. He left, gliding backward, never turning, and the door swung shut behind him. I didn't move until dawn, when the light steadied and the hum faded. The morning customers came, oblivious, complaining about gas prices, but I barely heard them. The claw marks were still there, the coin still on the counter, burning cold when I touched it. I pocketed it, not knowing why, and drove home, the desert watching me. 3 nights down, and I knew the station wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it was hungry for me. I didn't even try to call in sick for the 4th shift. The phone felt like a dead weight in my hand, and the thought of hearing the owner's voicemail again, or worse, nothing, made my stomach churn. I'd barely eaten all day, my appetite killed by the memory of that faceless thing. Its gray ooze pooling on the counter, the coin still burning a hole in my pocket. It was heavy, too heavy for its size, and every time I touched it, my fingers tingled like static crawling up my arm. I told myself I'd quit after tonight, find some other way to pay the bills, but Route 66 had its hooks in me now, and deep down I knew it wasn't letting go. The station looked wrong when I pulled up. The neon sign half dead, one side dark, the other spitting a sickly green glow. The air was colder than it should have been, sharp and biting, carrying a faint whiff of something metallic, like blood mixed with rust. I locked the door behind me, the bat now a permanent extension of my hand, and checked the windows twice. The claw marks from last night were deeper, black fluid crusted in the grooves, and the bloody footprints hadn't faded, curling toward the back like a trail I was too scared to follow. 10 o'clock came, and the world outside shifted again, the desert swallowing sound until even my own breathing felt muffled. The first customer didn't arrive so much as materialize, a figure standing in the lot where nothing had been a second before. She was old, or seemed old. Her back hunched, her hands gnarled like tree roots. Her dress was patched together from mismatched fabrics, stained with dark splotches that moved faintly, like oil swirling in water. She shuffled to the door, her cane tapping a rhythm that echoed in my chest, and when she pushed in, the smell hit me, mold and wet earth, like an open grave after rain. She didn't look at me, just wandered the aisles, her cane leaving tiny punctures in the floor, each one oozing a thin, inky liquid. She grabbed a bag of chips, her fingers trembling, and I saw her nails, long, yellowed, curling like talons, scraping the plastic until it tore. She didn't eat the chips, just held the bag to her chest, muttering in a language I didn't recognize, sharp and guttural, like she was arguing with someone I couldn't see. When she finally approached the counter, her eyes met mine, cloudy, but with something moving inside them like shadows darting under ice. "Change," she croaked, dropping a handful of coins that clinked too heavily, each one warm and slick like they'd been pulled from something living. I gave her the change, my hands shaking, and she smiled, her lips cracking open to reveal a tongue swollen and black, pulsing like it was its own creature. She left, but not before leaning close, her breath hot and sour. "They know you now," she whispered and tapped her cane once hard, making the floor hum beneath me. Outside, she didn't go to a car. She just stood by the pumps, her cane digging into the concrete, and then she sank, slowly like the ground was swallowing her, her body folding into itself until she was gone, leaving only a puddle of that inky fluid, bubbling softly. I didn't clean it, I couldn't. Midnight brought a new sound, a low, rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat coming from the walls. The lights flickered, casting shadows that moved when they shouldn't, stretching into shapes with too many limbs. A truck rolled in, its engine coughing black smoke that lingered in the air like fog. The driver climbed out, a hulking figure in overalls, his face hidden by a baseball cap pulled low. His boots left prints that glistened red, not blood, but something thicker, like paint that never dried. He didn't come inside, just stood by the pump, staring at the station, his head tilted like he was listening to something. When he finally entered, the thumping stopped, replaced by a silence that pressed against my eardrums. He smelled of copper and ash, and his hands were massive, knuckles swollen, skin split open to reveal raw, glistening muscle. He pointed at the beer cooler, and I grabbed a six-pack, my hands slick with sweat. Up close, I saw his neck, stitches, crude and uneven, running in a jagged line across his throat, like he'd been sewn back together. A thin trickle of black fluid leaked from the seams, dripping onto the floor. He paid with a wad of bills, crumpled and damp, and when I handed him the beer, his fingers brushed mine. They were cold, but something pulsed under the skin, like a second heartbeat. He grinned, his cap lifting just enough to show a mouth too wide, teeth jagged and uneven, like they'd been broken and reset wrong. "You're marked," he said, voice low and gravelly, and walked out, his boots leaving more of that red ooze. Outside, he didn't touch the pump, just climbed into his truck and drove off, the smoke trailing behind, forming shapes that looked like faces screaming. I mopped the floor, but the red ooze smeared into streaks that seemed to writhe, like veins under the tiles. The thumping started again, louder, and I noticed the back wall, the one the footprints pointed to, had a crack I hadn't seen before, thin but deep, leaking a faint glow, like something was behind it. I stayed away, gripping the bat, my eyes darting to the windows. At 2, the ground shook, not a hum but a tremor, knocking candy bars off the shelves. The pumps turned on again, gasoline spraying in arcs, pooling into shapes that looked like hands reaching up, fingers curling. A figure approached on foot, moving slow, deliberate, like they were savoring the walk. He was thin, almost skeletal, wrapped in a long coat that fluttered despite the still air. His face was pale, too pale, with eyes sunk so deep they were just shadows in their sockets. His lips were sewn shut, thick black thread crisscrossing them, but they twitched, like something was pushing from inside. He didn't enter, just pressed his hands against the window, the stitches on his lips stretching as he tried to speak. I heard it in my head, not my ears. A voice, sharp and splintered, saying, "Open the door." I didn't move. Couldn't. My legs locked as he pressed harder, his fingers leaving smears of something thick and green, like algae. His coat fell open and I saw his chest. Ribs exposed, skin peeled back, and inside something moved. A mass of writhing, eel-like things coiling around his organs. One slipped free, falling to the ground with a wet slap, squirming toward the door before dissolving into the concrete. He stayed there, staring until the tremors stopped, then turned and walked into the dark, his coat flapping like a vulture's wings. The smears on the window didn't come off, no matter how hard I scrubbed, and the crack in the back wall glowed brighter, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. By 3, I was done. I sat behind the counter, bat in my lap, the coin from last night burning in my pocket. That's when the final one came. No sound, no warning. Just a shadow that filled the doorway, too tall, too wide, like it was blocking out the world. The door opened without a jingle, and it stepped inside, ducking to fit. It wasn't human, not even close. Its body was a mass of twisted flesh, arms too long, ending in hands that dragged on the floor, fingers tipped with claws that clicked against the tiles. Its face was a mess of scars and sores, one eye dangling from its socket, swinging like a pendulum. It didn't speak, just moved to the counter, its breath a wet rattle that made my skin crawl. It dropped something on the counter. Not money, but a tooth. Human, stained yellow, with roots still bloody. I stared at it, my mind blank, and it leaned closer, its dangling eye brushing my hand, cold and slimy. "For the road," it said, voice like 1,000 whispers layered together, and reached into its own mouth, pulling out another tooth, then another, dropping them one by one, each one landing with a wet thud. I don't know how I didn't scream. It left, its claws gouging the floor, and the door swung shut, locking itself. I swept the teeth into the trash, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the bat. The crack in the wall was wider now, the glow brighter, and I swear I heard whispers coming from it, calling my name. Dawn came, the morning customers oblivious. But I wasn't the same. The station had claimed a piece of me, and with 2 shifts left, I knew it wasn't done. I couldn't look at the gas station without feeling it staring back. By the 5th night, the drive down Route 66 felt like a funeral procession, the desert closing in like it was herding me toward the end. My hands were raw from gripping the steering wheel, the coin from that faceless thing still in my pocket, heavy and cold, like it was anchoring me to this place. I'd tried throwing it away, but it was back in my jacket the next morning, like it had crawled there on its own. Sleep was a memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dangling eye, the sewn lips, the eel things writhing in that chest. But I went back, no choice. The station wasn't just a job anymore, it was a leash. The neon sign was completely dead tonight. The lot bathed in a sickly moonlight that made the pumps look like tombstones. The air was wrong, hot, sticky, like breathing through a wet rag, with a faint tang of sulfur that stung my nose. I locked the door, checked the bat, now chipped and stained from nights of nervous gripping, and avoided the back wall. The crack was wider, glowing faintly, the whispers louder, forming words I couldn't quite catch but felt in my gut. I turned the radio on for noise, but it spit static that sounded like laughter, so I shut it off and sat in silence, waiting. 10 o'clock hit, and the world held its breath. The first customer didn't come by car, they crawled. Low to the ground, scuttling like a beetle, their limbs bent at angles that made my joints ache just looking. They wore a tattered jacket, hood up, but strands of something stringy hung from it. Not hair, but thinner, like spider silk. When they pushed through the door, locked, I swear it was locked, the smell hit, damp fur and rotting fruit, so thick I gagged. They didn't stand, just crouched by the counter, their head twitching side to side like they were sniffing the air. "Got jerky?" they rasped, voice high and jagged like glass in a blender. I pointed to the rack, my hand shaking, and they scuttled over, their fingers, too many, some bent backward, grabbing a pack. Up close I saw their face, or what passed for one. Skin like wet paper, peeling at the edges, with tiny holes where eyes should have been, each one leaking a milky fluid that dripped onto the floor. They tore open the jerky with their teeth, chewing with a wet, crunching sound, and I saw their tongue, long, segmented, flicking out to lap up the fluid pooling at their feet. They paid with a handful of small round things, not coins but smooth like polished stones, warm and pulsing faintly. "Keep the change," they hissed, and scuttled out, leaving a trail of that milky fluid that smoked faintly when it hit the tiles. I didn't clean it, just stared as it sank into the floor. The whispers from the crack growing louder, almost gleeful. Midnight brought a new horror. A van pulled up, old and rusted, its engine coughing like it was choking on something. The driver didn't get out, but the side door slid open, and 2 figures stumbled into the lot. They were kids, or looked like kids, their clothes torn and too big like they'd raided a thrift store. They moved wrong, jerking like puppets, their heads lolling on necks that seemed too thin to hold them. When they entered, the smell was unbearable, rotting meat and something sharp like ammonia. Their faces were pale, eyes too big, pupils dilated to black pools, and their mouths hung open, drooling a thick gray sludge that splattered on the floor. "Candy," one said, her voice a child's but wrong, layered with something deeper, like 2 people speaking at once. I handed over a bag of gummy worms, my hands trembling, and noticed their fingers, fused together like they'd been melted and reshaped, nails sharp and black, digging into the bag. They didn't eat the candy, just tore it open and smeared it on their faces, the colors mixing with the sludge, their tongues lapping at it like dogs. The other one giggled, a sound that made my skin crawl, and pointed at me. "You're soft," he said, and his mouth stretched wider, splitting at the corners, blood trickling down his chin. They paid with a crumpled photo, old and faded, of a family smiling at a picnic. I didn't ask why. I just took it, my stomach twisting as their fingers brushed mine, cold and sticky. They left, climbing back into the van, and I saw the driver, a shadow, no face, just a shape that seemed to pulse. As they drove off, the van's windows flickered, showing faces pressed against the glass, mouths open in silent screams, hands clawing at nothing. I was shaking so bad I dropped the bat, the photo falling to the floor. I didn't pick it up. It felt wrong, like touching it would pull me into whatever hell they came from. The crack in the wall was glowing brighter, the whispers now a low chant, my name woven into it over and over. I stayed behind the counter, the bat back in my hands, my eyes locked on the door. At 2, the ground shook again, harder, knocking a shelf over, cans rolling everywhere. The pumps turned on, gasoline spraying in wild arcs, pooling into shapes that looked like mouths, opening and closing. A figure approached, not walking but floating an inch off the ground. A woman in a white dress, her hair long and black, covering her face. She didn't open the door, just appeared inside, standing by the cooler, her dress dripping a dark, viscous liquid that smelled like tar. Her head tilted, hair parting to reveal a face with no eyes, just empty sockets weeping blood, and a mouth that was too small, puckered like a wound. She didn't speak, just pointed at the water bottles. I grabbed one, my hand slick with sweat, and slid it across. Her fingers were long, boneless, wrapping around the bottle like vines. And when she opened it, she didn't drink. She poured it into her sockets, the water mixing with the blood, spilling down her cheeks. She sighed, a sound like wind through dead branches, and dropped a small wet bundle on the counter. Hair, human hair, tied with a piece of skin. "For you," she whispered, her voice echoing in my skull, and glided out, leaving a trail of that tar-like liquid. I didn't touch the bundle, just shoved it into the trash with the bat, my stomach heaving. The floor was slick now, the tar spreading, and the crack in the wall pulsed, the glow casting shadows that danced like they were alive. The whispers were louder, almost words now, "Come closer, see us." And I felt a pull, like the station itself was trying to drag me toward that crack. By 3, I was a wreck, sitting on the floor, bat across my knees, the coin burning in my pocket. That's when the last one came. No sound, no warning, just a shape filling the doorway, too big, too wrong. Its body a mass of twisted limbs like a spider made of human parts. It crawled in, its hands, too many, gripping the walls, leaving gouges that bled that same black fluid. Its face was a cluster of eyes, all different sizes, blinking out of sync, and a mouth that opened sideways, lined with teeth that looked like they'd been stolen from different mouths. It didn't speak, just crawled to the counter, its body scraping the floor, leaving a trail of skin flakes and blood. It dropped something. A finger, fresh, still twitching, the nail painted red. I stared, bile rising as it leaned closer, its eyes rolling, focusing on me one by one. "Yours," it said, voice like a swarm of insects, and reached out, its fingers brushing my arm, cold and wet, leaving a smear that burned. I swung the bat, screaming, but it didn't flinch, just laughed, a sound that made my ears ring, and crawled out, its limbs folding into itself as it vanished into the dark. The finger stayed, twitching on the counter, and I threw it into the trash, sobbing, the whispers from the crack now a roar, my name a command. Dawn came, the morning customers oblivious, but I wasn't there anymore. Not really. The station had taken too much, and with one shift left, I knew it was waiting to finish the job. The sixth night felt like walking into a grave I'd dug myself. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything but sit in my apartment, the coin from that faceless thing burning in my pocket, the weight of it pulling me back to Route 66. I tried to quit, wrote the text, dialed the owner, even stood at my door with my keys in hand ready to drive anywhere else. But my feet moved toward the car, and my hands turned the wheel, like the station was steering me. The desert stretched out, black and endless, the road a ribbon leading to a mouth that was already open. The station was a husk when I arrived. The neon sign was gone, just a skeleton of rusted metal, and the windows were fogged, like breath on glass. The air was thick with that sulfur blood stench, heavier now, coating my throat. I locked the door, though it felt pointless, and gripped the bat, its handle slick with my sweat and the stains of 5 nights of horror. The crack in the back wall was no longer a crack. It was a gash wide enough to see through, glowing a sickly yellow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The whispers were clear now, a chorus of voices, my name woven into a chant that made my skin itch. Come, see, join. 10 o'clock hit, and the world outside vanished. No stars, no horizon, just a void pressing against the windows. The first customer didn't arrive. They were just there, inside, standing by the counter. A man, or what might have been one, his body bent backward at the waist, head dangling, arms dragging on the floor. His skin was gray, peeling like old paint, revealing muscle that twitched and glistened. The smell was rancid, rotting flesh and burnt sugar so thick I choked. His mouth opened upside down and a tongue lolled out, long and barbed, dripping a black ichor that hissed on the tiles. "Matches," he gurgled, his voice bubbling like he was underwater. I fumbled for a pack, my hands shaking, and slid them across. His fingers, too long, joints bending wrong, closed around them, and I saw his nails, sharp and curved, digging into his own palm, blood welling up. He struck a match, the flame flaring blue, and held it to his face, burning the skin until it blistered and popped, the smell of charred meat filling the air. He laughed, a wet choking sound, and dropped a coin, another one etched with those twisting symbols, before crawling out, his body folding into itself, disappearing through the door without opening it. I didn't clean the ichor. It spread, pooling toward the gash in the wall like it was being drawn in. The whispers grew louder, insistent, and I felt a tug in my chest, like something was pulling me toward that glow. Midnight brought a worse one. A car pulled up, no sound, no headlights, just a shadow that swallowed the light. The driver stepped out, a woman, her body too long, limbs stretching like taffy. Her face was a mask of sores, each one pulsing, leaking a thick white pus that moved like it was alive. She glided inside, her feet not touching the floor, her dress trailing behind, soaked in something that smelled like bile and copper. Her eyes were gone, just holes that wept that pus, and when she smiled, her mouth split wider, revealing gums that bled freely, teeth loose and rattling. "Cigarettes," she whispered, her voice a hiss that echoed in my skull. I grabbed a pack, avoiding her gaze, but she leaned closer, her breath hot and sour. "You're almost ready," she said, and her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Her touch burned, the skin blistering instantly, and I yanked away, the bat swinging wildly. She didn't flinch, just laughed, a sound like bones grinding, and dropped a handful of teeth, human, some still bloody on the counter. She left, gliding back to her car, and as it drove off, I saw shapes in the windows writhing, their mouths open in silent howls. The blister on my wrist throbbed red and angry, and the gash in the wall pulsed brighter. The whispers now a scream. Come. Now. I stayed behind the counter, the bat useless, my eyes locked on the gash, the glow hypnotic, pulling at me. The coins in my pocket burned hotter, and when I pulled them out, they were warm, almost alive, the symbols writhing like worms. At 2, the ground shook so hard the shelves collapsed, glass bottles shattering, their contents mixing with the ichor and pus on the floor. The pumps outside erupted, gasoline spraying in geysers, forming shapes that screamed. Faces twisting in the liquid. A figure appeared, not at the door but in the gash, stepping out like it was a door. It was tall, too tall, its body a patchwork of flesh, different shades stitched together, seams oozing a green slime. Its face was a mess of eyes, dozens all blinking, some human, some not, and a mouth that stretched across its chest, lined with teeth that chattered like castanets. It didn't speak, just pointed at me, its fingers, claws really, dripping that slime. I backed away, tripping over the bat, and it moved closer, its eyes rolling, focusing on me one by one. The air grew heavier, the whispers a roar, and I felt the coins in my pocket pulse, matching the rhythm of the gash's glow. You're ours, it said, not with words but in my head, a voice like knives scraping bone. It reached for me, its claws brushing my chest, and I felt my skin split, a sharp pain that made me scream. It laughed, a sound that shook the walls, and stepped back into the gash, the glow swallowing it. I collapsed, blood seeping through my shirt, the wound shallow but burning like acid. The gash was wider now, big enough to step through, and the pull was stronger, my feet inching toward it without my consent. I grabbed the counter, anchoring myself, but the whispers were relentless, promising things. Rest, answers, belonging, if I'd just stepped through. By 3, I was barely holding on. The station was alive, the walls creaking, the floor pulsing, the gash a beacon that lit the room in sickly yellow. The final customer didn't come from outside. It came from the gash, crawling out on hands and knees. A thing that was once human but no longer. Its body was twisted, limbs bent backward, spine arched like a bow. Its face was gone, just a smooth expanse of skin. But it moaned, a sound that tore at my sanity. And its hands, covered in mouths, each with tiny, sharp teeth, reached for me. I swung the bat, screaming, but it caught it, the mouths biting into the wood, splintering it. You can't leave, it said, the voice coming from those mouths, a chorus of whispers that matched the gash's chant. It lunged, its hands grabbing my arms, the teeth sinking in, blood welling up. I kicked, thrashed, but it was strong, its body coiling around me, the mouths biting, tearing. I felt my skin give, felt something inside me shift like the station was claiming me. Then the gash pulsed brighter than ever, and the thing froze, its mouth still chewing. A sound came from the gash, not whispers but a scream, human, desperate, and I saw it. A figure, faint, trapped inside, clawing at the edges. It was me, or something like me, my face twisted in terror. The thing let go, crawling back into the gash, and the glow dimmed, the whispers fading to a murmur. Dawn broke, the station snapping back to normal. The gash just a crack again, the floor clean, the pumps silent. The morning customers came, oblivious. But my arms were bloody, the wounds real, the coin still in my pocket, heavier now. I drove home, the station in my rear view, but it wasn't done. It never would be. I quit that day, left a note, never went back. But the coins are still here, on my table, pulsing faintly. The whispers follow me, soft but clear. And sometimes in the dark I feel the gash calling, waiting for me to step through. That's all for today. Hope you can still sleep tonight. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for next story.